Good evening, everyone. Good evening again. So we were having a look at Tosfos Divrei Maschil Hari Elu, in which Tosfos said two parts of Tosfos. Tosfos asks the question and gives an answer. So the question Tosfos asks is that from the Reisha of the Mishnah, in other words, the Mishnah on at the beginning of our Perek, we already see this klal, because the Mishnah says the Mishnah says that ha'ista melachas haba mein melacha achas ein chayiv ela achas. So we already see this klal. I can't remember who it was. If you can remind me who it was. Someone pushed me after Shiur about a matter that I sort of glossed over. Was it Yasha who pushed me about this, or? Okay, someone pushed me after Shiur about a matter that I glossed over, about what exactly is the simplest translation of this phrase, ha'isa melachas haba me'ein melacha achas. Sorry? It was Asha, okay. And it was a fair pushing, and at the time I said I hadn't thought about it. Since then I have thought about it, and I still don't know the answer. I'm not sure what to say. Tosfos, in his question, assumes that this should teach us the rule of Toldot b'makom av, and Tosfos in his answer says that you would have thought that this is telling us only the rule of shtei toldos rather than av and Toldot. Now, Asha pointed out to me, and I sort of said it in Shiur vaguely, but not I sort of left my thinking a little bit blurred. There are three possible understandings of what melacha achas, what melachas habe me'ein melachas achas means. It can either mean two toldos, or it can mean an av and a tolda, or it can mean two co-overs, like oifa and marasha, which are the identical av. Tosfos assumes it means av and it means two toldos, and therefore says we wouldn't know the halacha of av and tolda. It's not entirely clear where Tosfos gets that assumption from. I mean, why does shtei melachas me'ein melachas haba me'ein melacha achas? And more than that, Gimel on the base seems to use, and this was Asher's point, seems to use the language of melachas haba me'ein melacha achas with respect to what, at least according to the Rambam and Rashi's, Tosfos in his question understands that it should teach us the halacha of Toldot b'makom av. Tosfos in his answer says it's referring to, we would have thought it refers to two toldos, but av the tolda we wouldn't have thought it refers to. So Tosfos assumes that it's more obvious that it should refer to av that it should refer to shtei toldos than av tolda. I don't know why the language of melachas haba me'ein melacha achas implies that. And as Asher pointed out, the Gemara in Ein Gimel on the base, when it talks about zereah, zomer, notea, mavrich, or markiv, which are all forms of kula melacha achasein, says the Gemara, these are all forms of zereah, and Rashi and the Rambam learn that at least some on the list, like Zereah and Notea, are co-ovos melachos. And the Gemara asks Micah Mashman on how is it relevant to tell you kula melacha achasein? And the Gemara answers because of oifa melachas haba me'ein melacha achas ein chayiv al achas. The nafkamina is that if you do melachas haba me'ein melacha achas, you only chayiv once. In which case, the only makara we have in which the Gemara sort of explicitly speaks about what this phrase means seems to say it's talking about a case of co-ovos melachos, as opposed to anything else, or arguably, perhaps with some on the list, an av and a tolda. The Gemara doesn't understand the phrase to mean two toldas, because the list certainly includes co-ovos, and also perhaps ovos and toldas, depending on how you learn the features of the list. And it doesn't teach us the din of two toldas. It doesn't just teach us the din of two toldas. So I'm not entirely clear what Tosfos is seeing in how Tosfos is understanding the phraseology of melachas haba me'ein melacha achas, and why Tosfos says that can't include av the tolda. I'll call upon him in Svara, in Lomdus, you see in Tosfos, that Tosfos assumes that there's a bigger chiddush in state, that it's more obvious that shtei Toldot should be exempt than that an Av and Toldot should be exempt. And the same deal, as I mentioned last time, is apparent in the Rambam, because the Rambam in Hilchos Shogeg, Perek Zayin Halacha Hey, says the same thing. He says, Oisat Av v'Toldot v'Helam Achas Ein Chai v'Lachatas Achas v'Ein Sorach Lomar Oisat Toldot Haba. So you see in the Rambam that he thought it was more obvious that several Toldos should be exempt more than an Av and a Toldot. Is that reasonably clear? That's
So in a hierarchy, sorry.
Yeah, someone's just asking, and then I'll come to you.
Yeah.
Just constantly uses the Abe. This is the first time the Mishnah uses the phrase Ota Malach Abe Me'ain Malach is the bad reading. You're doing Me'ain Malach are soldiers. Now I'm looking at the Mishnah line.
In the Mishnah, I don't see a diuk. I don't see a diuk either way. I don't hear that. I hear, but I don't understand the suggestion. What's the diuk in the language of the Mishnah? Correct, because they're not me'in melach achas in the earlier cases. They're melachas haba. The question is, when you have the phrase me'in melachas haba, me'in melach achas, what melachas is it referring to? Which relationship of melachas is it referring to? And it's at least legitimate to when let's say in the Rishon Mishnah it says osu melacha haba b'Shabbat haba, that means literally lots of melachas. It means you did bona and kotza, right? The question is at the end when it says osu melachas haba me'in melacha achas, what that phrase means.
I don't think it's particularly clear. That could mean various different Toldot. With that phrase,
Meaning you could translate melachas haba me'ein melach achas as each of these many melachas, each one is a me'ein of one melacha. Translation, each one is a Toldot. You could, that is, I hear your point, that's a reasonable reading in the phraseology of the Mishnah. The problem is that, which is what more or less what I said in the previous year, when I without focusing clearly on it, I said evidently that's how Tosfos reads the Mishnah. The problem is that the Gemara, at least in Ayin Gimel Amud Beis, as Asher pointed out, doesn't seem to read the phrase like that. The Gemara in Ayin Gimel Amud Beis reads the phrase as again, I don't want to relook at that sukha in too great detail, but the Gemara there says Zereya Zomer Notea Mavrich Markiv. Now, what's the relationship between all these malachas? So both Rashi and the Rambam learn that at least some of them, well, one of them is an Av. Zereya is an Av. Notea is a co-Av according to Rashi, and then some of the others are co-Av, some of them are Toldot. No, but there it says Kulon Malach Achasein. Correct. So there, right. So, correct. But the Notea, according to Rashi and the Rambam, is a co-Av. So in that list, you have an Av, you have a co-Av, and arguably you have a Toldot. So you see that the Gemara calls either an Av and a Toldot, or an Av and a co-Av as Me'ein Melach Achas. It doesn't read like you're suggesting, like I thought on Sunday, and like Tosfos says, that it's two Toldos. One thing is clear, that list is not just a list of Toldos. The Gemara is clearly saying that in that list includes an Av and a ko'av and a toldot, and nonetheless that's all chayav achas. Unless you say the Gemara was taking a shortcut. In other words, really the Gemara means that by the time you finish all the diukim in the Mishnah, you see you're only chayav one chatos for one collection of malachas, and the Gemara just brings a shorthand of mein malach achas. But what it really means is the mein malach achas in combination with the diuk in the sukkah at the end of ein heim and base. So it could be the Gemara just meant as a shorthand that if you do lots of malachas, you only chayav one, and that's the phrase it uses to say that, even though technically that phrase could only mean two toldos, and you need to rely on our Gemara to say that it means an av and a tolda. That I suppose would be a reasonable answer to the question. That's what we would have to say.
In the Gemara, it just says kulan malacha achad. It doesn't say me'ein malacha achad. So there could be a different thing, as Adam was suggesting, that me'ein means derived from.
No, Martin, the diuk is not from the beginning of the Gemara where it says kulan malacha achas. It's from the continuum. My kamashmaran, ha'osu malachas haba me'ein malachas achas in chayav achas. So that's where it quotes the me'ein phrase in the Mishnah. Okay, so just to summarize, so Adam has convincingly argued that we should look at the simplest reading of the phrase me'ein malacha achas to mean malachas haba me'ein malacha achas means many malachas, which are each of them are me'ein type malacha, i.e. each one is a tolda. That's how Tosfos is reading. And Tosfos would have to say that the Gemara and Gimel base is lav dafka. The point of the Gemara is why is it relevant to say that all these malachas are clustered together, to say you only chayav one chatos? And the Gemara just brings a shortcut to that principle, even though technically speaking, that line it quotes doesn't fully prove the Gemara's point, because you also need the end of the sukkah and ein heim and base together, the diuk for the end of the Mishnah also to substantiate it. That's what you would have to say.
We did say that.
That may be true, but nonetheless, the Gemara is using that phraseology to say that you're only chayav for one, even when you do two co-others at the end of the day, right? Yeah. Okay. I mean, maybe that's how the Gemara is learning it.
Rashi is already saying on the Kulan Malach Achat Hein that only Zomer is the Tolda. All the others are co-avs.
That's just Rashi, yeah. Well, however, I'm avoiding going into detail what each malacha is. However you learn the Gemara, according to both Rashi and the Rambam, some of the list are co-others and some of the list are toldos. In which case, we do have the simplest reading of the Gemara is not like Tosfos, and the Gemara understands this phrase to mean that an av and a toldo or an av and a kav are chayav. There's no, I don't see a way. Having thought of Asher's point, I don't see a way of getting away from that being the simplest reading of the Gemara. Nonetheless, maybe it's legitimate to say this Gemara is lav dafka, and the Gemara is just saying that this principle summarizes it, and not more than that.
Yeah, but by taking away the difficulty in that Gemara, we're then left with the difficulty in our Gemara as to exactly what does it mean Fuke Midrabi Eliezer then, because if what we're saying we're learning from the phrase in our Mishnah is the same as what we learned in the previous Mishnah, then what's the Gemara talking about? We've learned that already.
No, correct. So that's what Tosfos is coming to resolve, and Tosfos is coming to say that technically Malachas Haba, Malacha Achas wouldn't have told us everything. We could have still misunderstood it, therefore we need the extra diuk. But now that we have the extra diuk, then we look back and we realize that Malachas Haba, Malacha Achas means all scenarios, and therefore the Gemara in Ein Gimel base is quoting the Maskana. In other words, in truth, if I ask you, what is the halacha? Does that only include lots of toldas, or does it even include an av and a tolda? The answer is it does include an av and a tolda, because we wouldn't have been sure to read it in that sense until we had our second diuk in our Gemara. But now that we have the second diuk in the Gemara, we realize that the correct translation, looking back, is that it includes both, and therefore this would be. I have a little bit of a mashal for this. I wasn't going to say this yet. But there's a parallel sort of point, sort of similar stylistic issue in Rashi, because in Rabbi Yochanan's statement at the top of Ein Gimel and Beis, Rabbi Yochanan Shem Asan Kulam Behelam Achas Chayvel Kol Achas Achas. That's the top of Ein Gimel and Beis. If you do all of them Behelam Achas, you're Chayv on 39. That's the reason for the minyan at the beginning of the Mishnah to tell you that if you do all the malachas, all 39 malachas, you're Chayvel Kol Achas Achas. So does that tell me you are only chayav 39 but you're not chayiv on the Toldos? Or does that tell me you're chayiv more than one, you're chayiv all 39? Is Rabbi Yochanan's chiddush to tell me you're chayiv 39, or is chiddush to tell me you're not chayiv more than 39? When Rabbi Yochanan said that diuk at the beginning of the Mishnah, which one was he coming to say? Rabbi Yochanan, that's the minyan or lomeli. The minyan of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan said. So what's the minyan of the Mishnah at the beginning coming to say? That you're chayiv 39, not one, or that you're chayiv, or that you're chayiv. Can I just ask people to mute themselves? Sorry, I'm not going to get into it. Or that you're chayiv more than you're chayiv 39, not one, or that you're chayiv more than 39.
I'd say the former from
Not that you're not chayiv more than 39. Sorry.
I'd say the former from the Lashon of the Mishnah, because he's saying al kol echad v'echad. If he wanted to mean the latter, he would have said rak.
More than that. Bring me a proof. What was Rabbi Yochanan coming to say? So you see from our Gemara in Ein Hamer base that the Gemara didn't yet know at this point, till we came to the Seif of the Mishnah, the Gemara didn't have a diuk that you're not machayiv on the Toldot Makamav. So when Rabbi Yochanan said you're chayiv 39, he can't have meant that the minyan in the Reisha is coming to exclude Toldos, because then you don't need the Sefer. The Gemara says it's only in the Sefer that we understand that we're coming to exclude Toldos. So when Rabbi Yochanan said you're only chayiv on the translation of the phrase minyan or lomadi, why do I need the minyan at the beginning? Rabbi Yochanan must be to tell me that you're chayiv many chafov. And look in Rashi. If you forgot all of Hilchos Shabbos, chayiv kama chatzos olav. How many chatzos are you chayiv for it? Then we have a look at the parallel Gemara in Shabbos Daf Vav Amud Beis, where the Gemara again quotes Rabbi Yochanan. And there Rashi says, I printed this on page 2 in the handout, so we had to look at it actually also when we learned that first Gemara on base. Minyan or lomeli, why does it say minyan? Listen to Avos Melachot Zerei V'Chosh, lomeli lashmini minyan, why does it tell me the minyan? You just count how many there are. Answers the Gemara, Chayv al-Kalachas Achos, Rashi says, how many, comes to tell me how many lachas you chayv in one heron. Vashmina Nabon Chas Achos, it tells me 39, V'suloi, and no more. Shafir also told to say in a mime, even if you did the Toldos with them, you don't bring on the Toldos when you did it with its father, because it's like repeating the same thing twice, because they're all one Avera. So Rashi in Daf Vav translates into Rabbi Yochanan's statement the rule that you're not chayiv and the Toldos Makam Av. Now, is that Rabbi Yochanan's statement? It's not Rabbi Yochanan's statement. It's the Gemara that says it as the diuk of Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Lezer, from the minyan of the Sefer. Eilu avos malachos, eilu lafukim Rabbi Lezer. I told him, Makam Av. Is anyone with me here? Does this make sense?
Can I just ask?
But one second, Martin. Is this? Does this make sense? The question I'm asking.
The question makes sense.
The question makes sense. So I just want to finish then my point, which is that Rashi evidently is saying that once we have the diukim from the Sefer, it makes sense to read this back into the Reisha also. At the end of the day, what is the minyan at the beginning? So had we only had the minyan at the beginning, we would have only been able to learn the positive, that you're chayiv more than one, you're chayiv 39. We wouldn't have been able to learn that you're not chayiv more than 39. But now that we have the Eilu at the end, which comes to Rabbi Lezer, Rashi is happy in Daf Vav to summarize the impact of Rabbi Yochanan's statement to mean that you're chayiv only 39 and not more than that. You're not chayiv in the Toldos. Even though technically Rabbi Yochanan couldn't prove that from the Reisha, he could only prove it from the Sefer. So I'm saying a similar idea was in the language of the Gemara. When the Gemara translates the phrase Melachos Haba Me'ein Melacha Achas, it's using it in the way that we understand eventually the phrase means after we have all the diukim from the continuation of the Gemara. Sorry, Martin.
My question was going to be, are we not back in or the same situation as Tosfot? And Tosfot asked a question on the Sefer, admittedly, saying how can we, if we translate the first Mishnah of our Perek unless we translate it in a certain way, we're left with this statement at the Sefer of our Mishnah being exactly the same as something we've learned in the previous Mishnah. Surely even here in this statement of Rabbi Yochanan, we're learning exactly the same thing as we've learned in the first Mishnah. If all he means is inclusive, there's no
That's
chiddush.
my point. That is my point. Rabbi Yochanan cannot have meant to exclude Toldot, because the Gemara says that we only know in the faith of the Mishnah. It must be that Rabbi Yochanan only meant to say that you're chayiv more than one. You're chayiv 39, but he didn't mean to say only 39 and not on the Toldot. It's only when we get to the end of the Gemara and we see what Rabbi Yochanan, when we see that the Mishnah excludes Toldot, then now Rashi is happy to summarize back into the impact of Rabbi Yochanan on both points.
So my question is, what Rabbi Yochanan seems to be learning this from the statement in the second Mishnah, the minyan of the Melachot. But we've already learned that in the first Mishnah, that you're going to be chayav kol achat v'achat if you do it. So what's the chiddush that we are learning from the minyan? It's is what Rabbi Yochanan is saying not exactly the same as ase melachot harbe b'shabbatot harbe chayav al kol av malacha al malacha?
I don't know. What's Rabbi Yochanan teaching more than the beginning of the Mishnah at the beginning of Kal Gadol? Also a question, correct? Okay, so we have here, we have a Mishnah at the beginning of Kal Gadol that teaches us that you are chayav on Kol Av Melacha or Melacha, and a Mishnah in Kal Gadol that says that you're not chayav on Me'ein Melachas Habeh. Then we have a statement of Rabbi Yochanan who explains the minyan of the Reisha. And we have a Gemara in Ein Hayom Beis, our Gemara, that explains the Elu and the minyan of the Sefer. The Elu is to exclude Toldot, says the Gemara. And there's really two questions we could ask on that. How is that different from the first Mishnah which already says Me'ein Melachas Habeh, that you're not chayav in Toldot Makom Av? And secondly, how is that different from Rabbi Yochanan, who already said you're chayav 39? So Tosfos asks the first question and says that we could have learned that Mishnah is talking about where you do an Av for Toldot, but not where you do where you do two Toldots, but not where you do an Av and a Toldot. And Rabbi Yochanan, we've answered, is coming to tell us that you're chayav for each of the 39. Martin is now saying that that is already the first Mishnah that says that you're chayav on all 39. Again, let's just get clear. What does the first Mishnah? What does the first Mishnah say?
Well, that's different to Rabbi Yochanan, who's talking about He'elem Achat. It's a Shocheach Be'He'elem Achad, or he's doing something. Not necessarily, because it is talking about many Shabbatot.
I believe the answer is that the Mishnah at the beginning of Kal Gadol is, again, there's a number of cases in the Mishnah. One case of the Mishnah is Hayodea Shu Shabbos, you know it's Shabbos, V'osu Melachos Habeh b'Shabbos Habeh chayav al kol av melacha melacha. Why is that? Because you know it's Shabbos, so what's your shogeg? Again, the point of the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek is we have to count how many shogegs you've made. So if you shecheach ikar Shabbos, you don't know the whole concept of Shabbos, then even if you do Melachos Habeh b'Shabbos Habeh, there's only one shogeg over here, ikar Shabbos. If you know ikar Shabbos and you just don't know that today is Shabbos, then you're chayav al kol Shabbos to Shabbos. If you know that today is Shabbos, but you don't know that these are melachos, then you're chayav on each melacha or melacha. Rabbi Yochanan's chiddush now is, what happens if I know that today is Shabbos, so it's not one Shogeg Shabbos, but I don't know any of the Surim on Shabbos? So there, do we view it as 39 Shogegs, because I don't know any of the melachos of Shabbos, and in which case it would be identical to the first Mishnah? Or do we view it as one shogeg because I've forgotten all of Hilchos Shabbos? On that, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you are chayiv 39 melachos. And as we view this as 39 Shogeg. And this is what Rashi says in his explanation of the Gemara. In this only kol chilchos Shabbos menu, you've forgotten all the halachos of Shabbos. Chayiv kana chatos on it. How many you're chayiv? 39 many chatos on it. In other words, you're not just chayiv one chatos because you have forgotten Ikka Shabbos. You know it's Ikka Shabbos and you have forgotten. We view this as knowing it's Ikka Shabbos and I'm having forgotten 39 melachos. Is this clear? Sorry? Yeah. So that's a clear answer to your point, Martin, and it's come back to me now. Just now, the Mepharshim understand Rashi. So again, just to summarize the figure, the first Mishnah tells us a chiddush that if you've forgotten Ikka Shabbos, that's one shogeg. If you don't know that today is Shabbos, then each Shabbos is the own shogeg. If you know that today is Shabbos and you know Ikka Shabbos, you're chayiv on each melacha and melacha that you've done. Then Rabbi Yochanan tells us a chiddush in the next Mishnah that you are chayiv. I'm sorry, and I should have mentioned. And then the Mishnah tells us, the first Mishnah tells us, if you do melachas haba me'in melacha achas, you only chayiv one, which Tosha says means two Toldot. That's the first Mishnah. Then Rabbi Yochanan teaches us that even if you've forgotten all of the halachas of Shabbos, nonetheless you're chayiv al kol melacha melacha, you're chayiv 39 shogeg. That's Rabbi Yochanan in the Reisha. And then the diuk of Gemara in the Sefer is that is to exclude Rabbi Lezer, which Tosfos learns to mean that you're chayiv in an av and a tolda the makom achas. That's the summary of what comes out from Tosfos. All we've done now today, unfortunately, therefore, is the maths of the sugya. On Sunday, we'll have to ask ourselves what would be the svara to make a difference between these three scenarios: the scenario of tolda of melacha A and tolda of melacha B, the scenario of two toldas of melacha A, and the scenario of av and tolda of melacha A. Why should all of them be treated differently? That we'll have to try and look at the svara of what this is telling us about the relationship between avos and toldas. But for now, with great difficulty, I think we'll stop.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.